let's talk about death. Or rather, death industrial. Or maybe even both. Death is a huge theme within the world of darker music, and perhaps is one of the biggest topics in any media next to love. Death industrial is a subgenre of industrial music that is far heavier with elements of power electronics. The genre is said to have been created by a man named Roger Carmanek, who is the future founder of the amazing and influential label Cold Meat Industry, and his project, Brighter Death Now, is well known among fans of the genre. While these two topics bring to mind many different albums and artists, I feel for myself and others, one musician truly stands out from the rest when discussing these things. A very isolated man from a small Italian town named Marco Corbelli. The project, Atrax Morgue. The obsession, death. I have been a fan of Atrax Morgue's work for quite a few years now, and even among the abyss of genres and noise and music I subject myself to almost daily, Atrax Morgue's work has always stood out to me. The sounds, the synths, the genuinely disturbing and creepy atmosphere, the evil sounding vocals with horrifying lyrics. This was a man who knew how to make a truly frightening experience. Atrax Morgue was born Marco Corbelli in 1970 in the town of Sassuolo, Italy, and had serious interests in music since his very first record, which was Soft Cell's non-stop erotic cabaret. Soon, by 1989, Marco's obsession with heavier music such as industrial became more and more apparent. It's appropriate that we started the video with discussing Death Industrial and Roger Carmanek. Cold Meat Industry and Brighter Death Now were some of the biggest influences for Marco and his music. In a 2001 interview with Esthetik magazine, Marco was asked the question of, "What first attracted you to noise?" Within Marco's response, he states, "I also knew about Cold Meat Industry, buying some of Roger Carmanek's first releases, like Memorandom's Ox Mort LP and Machine and Zimmer's 412 LP. I was hit very hard by the sounds of these bands, very obscure and harsh, and also by the quality of the packaging. At that time, I thought Cold Meat Industry was the label that completely satisfied my taste. I wrote a congratulation letter to Carmanek, and, since then, I have always had a good relationship with CMI. Brighter Death Now has influenced me very much, because it's the very pure expression of darkness, pain, and death sounds." You would also come to find more influence in bands such as White House, MB, Coil, Sutcliffe Eugen, and many more. With his passion for heavier music and a desire to capture the energy his obsessions would create for himself, he started recording tapes under the project Atrax Morgue in 1993, along with starting his own record label, Slaughter Productions. He would record with just a very simple setup, a sequential circuit 6-track, a microphone connected with a multi-effect, tape decks, and a mixer. As you can see, not just from this interview only, but pretty much in every discussion on Atrax Morgue's music, the topic of death and feelings of isolation is always at the forefront. Many fans will say that this is the distinction and what makes Atrax Morgue stand above the rest, this absolute obsession within the lyrics of hurting oneself and longing for death and how sincere it seems to be, as well as how horrifying and just genuinely creepy his music could be. In another interview with Ace File magazine in 1998, when asked the question, "Do you wish to suffer?" Marco says, "Yes, I am really obsessed and fascinated by death. I am obsessed and fascinated by my inner fears and by what troubles me. I think that more people don't accept the idea of death, but it's really hypocrisy. Their lives are fake. They don't really know that to enjoy the deep taste of life, it is necessary to enjoy and to know the deep taste of death. Atrax Morgue was an artist who dabbled in making noise, power electronics, dark ambient, and death industrial. When asked what does Atrax Morgue mean, he says it doesn't mean anything. However, Atrax is the name of a very poisonous spider from Australia that its bites will cause dizziness, hallucinating, panic attacks, and even death. He is someone who is highly obsessed with death, masochism, perversion, exploitation, and violence. He is someone who loves making music, running his own label, and collabing with other artists and spending time sharing their passions for movies and art. He was someone who sadly, eventually, took his own life. On the 6th of May, 2007, Marco Corbelli ended his own life by hanging. The news left many shocked and sad, but also many not surprised. And as the case of most stories of musician death, the suicide had seemed to bring in even more new fans who had been interested by the morbid fact that perhaps this person obsessed with death in his work had in fact been very genuine. And here for me comes in the problem. His death, it would seem for many, overshadows any normal appreciation for his work on its own merit. However, I really do think there are plenty of reasons to check out Atrax Morgue that go well beyond the fact that an artist so obsessed with death had tragically taken his own life. There is a fantastic article about this specific topic written by the awesome writer and musician Drew Daniel, who is also one half of the experimental electronic duo Matmos. His essay, In Search of Death, or Why Bother Listening to Atrax Morgue, really helps put this weird fan obsession with his death into perspective, and also talking about why it's worth listening to him, despite some of the more problematic ideas in his music. And that is also what I'm going to do right now in my video. Atrax Morgue is often considered one of the most influential projects within the Italian noise scene. Many have said to have been inspired by his work and began making music because of Atrax Morgue, as well as some of them even naming their projects after track names, with projects such as Stab Electronics. There is much respect for Marco's everlasting impact in the scene, not only in the Italian death industrial scene, but the genre throughout the world, especially in the United States. Besides obviously appearing on his own label, Slaughter Productions, Atrax Morgue has also appeared on many well-respected and known industrial and noise labels, such as the Italian Old Europa Cafe, the US label Self Abuse Records, Chicago-based Bloodlust with an exclamation point, Menstrual Recordings, and of course the ever-amazing Italian noise powerhouse Urashima Records. Since the very first Atrax Morgue tape and the start of Slaughter Productions in 1992, Marco's impact on how many approach minimal noise, pulsing death industrial, terrifying icy dark ambient, and death-obsessed lyrics can definitely be felt even today, with artists like Puce Mary, Coma Detox, Moral Order, Climax Denial, and just so many more, tons and tons of artists that I'm going to run out of script space and go out of my mind trying to even list all the bands that I could say have taken so much influence from Marco's style. So I highly suggest just going in and listening to some of them and going down the fun rabbit hole of discovering this whole entire scene. It should go without saying that an artist with such a wide reach and with such a strong influence on others should definitely be under anyone's radar and absolutely worth checking out for anyone interested in these genres. Another huge factor in why Marco's work is worthy of recognition beyond his death is how strongly and purely his music can stimulate emotional response in the listener. The inner emotions of isolation and alienation that Marco had experienced must have felt very unique and deeply personal to himself, so much so that he felt the need to make such dark, terrifying music. The emotions, thoughts, and feelings of Marco himself, and whatever topics he is touching upon, feel absurdly strong and very genuine. The sheer strength of these feelings of isolation, obsession, masochism, alienation, perversion, depression, hypochondria, and of course death are sometimes felt even stronger in his work than many other that tackles the same subject matter. In a 1996 interview with TDR magazine, the interviewer asked, "A common factor for nearly all your tapes is that they mainly deal with people living in isolation, marginalized by society. Do you feel outcasted too?" In which Marco responds with, "I sincerely hope the people who like my tapes and my performances are people like myself who feel outcasted from society." There is another excellent essay written about Marco on the website tisbor.com, and it seems to be originally an article written for the music review site Heathen Harvest. And I believe the author is also an Italian visual artist known as Nicola Vinciguerra. It was a bit hard for me to find information on who exactly wrote this article because the artist seems to be a bit of an enigma. But anyway, I really do hope you check out this website because there's some amazing art on here, and this essay is amazingly well written and emotional. This whole essay brings different perspectives on Marco's work from someone who is also from Italy and has met him in person. A very fascinating point about Marco's perspective is brought up in the article when the author mentions in a quote, "One element that perhaps is understudied or even ignored by foreign fans is that Marco's vision perfectly narrates the gloomy, desperate, bleak atmosphere of Italian suburbia." They go on to say, "Any self-respecting Italian knows in his heart that we are all walking on a pile of corpses all the time, and centuries of blood flow under our feet and in our walls." This notion that Marco's music can help the listener to understand the feelings and ideals of an area outside the listener's world that they may never know or quite understand definitely helps add even more personal identity to Atrax Morgue beyond just depraved death industrial. Which leads me to a point I wanted to make with this video that I had come to discover through doing all this research for this project. I had gone into learning about Atrax Morgue with the idea that his music and work was almost completely just about death and the obsession with wanting to die. But after having read all these interviews and listening to, well, mostly listening to everything he has put out because there's quite a bit, and hearing the stories of others who have had known him, it's clear that the real topic of all his music was truly isolation and the loneliness that he felt, and the fact that he just felt so alienated and different from other people. Loneliness and madness that comes with it. Not only is Atrax Morgue truly some creepy, chilling, and unique and death industrial, but it is also very lonely sounding and alienating, just like Marco Corbelli himself. So now that I have hopefully helped convince you to check out Atrax Morgue, and why his music is unique, defining, and influential well beyond just the fact of his death, I want to help with how you should start listening to Atrax Morgue. As the title suggests, this is indeed a where to start video, and of course, as always, you could just absolutely jump in with any album and see where the rabbit hole takes you from there. However, I will say that the Atrax Morgue hole is very deep, almost abyss-like. That's why I thought I would throw out some suggestions to help you get started and get familiar with his sound. According to Discogs, there are over 80 releases under the project name of Atrax Morgue, and that is not including some of Marco's other side projects like Mörder Machine, Necrophilia, and Cranevim. So basically, I'm just going to feature some excellent work as a starting point. I did try to pick albums that showed some of the multiple elements and themes in his work as well, and also picking albums that are not too hard to track down or listen to. I wanted to suggest albums such as Woundfucker, which is a fantastic example of Marco's ability to create very chilling and alienating noise. The record is rather long, so that was another issue that I had thought of when trying to pick out good albums to just start out with. These albums that I had picked contain some of the main elements in his music, including very minimal, pulsing synths, tracks with the heavy distorted and filtered screaming vocals, pure noise tracks, and a bit of dark ambient. Also, if anyone was curious about my first Atrax Morgue album, it was actually the 1993 Split, with Marco and his fellow dark ambient Italian noise artist Lunis, which is a solo project of Devis Granzira. And the album was Necrosintesti. I had been searching for dark ambient at the time and came upon this tape, and it was the first I'd ever heard of Atrax Morgue, and immediately I fell in love. I will say this tape itself is mostly dark ambient with a bit of noise, but the sound is addicting and really puts you in a lull. My favorite track that I listen to a lot actually is one of the Lunis tracks, I Wanna Be Your God. Alright, so let's get started. Hopefully I have acclimated you a bit to the brain-melting sounds of Marco's work through playing some of his tracks to the video already, a very subtle brainwashing on my part. Many of these tracks are from the albums Paranoia and Slush of a Maniac, and honestly I could not think of two more solid albums that you could just jump right into and really get a feel of what Atrax Morgue is about. Let's start with the first and only full-length CD album Marco ever put on to old Europa Cafe, Paranoia from the year 2000. This is just an excellent album that has the sound in top form here. All the elements show up from mostly all the tracks having a wonderful one-tone sound that is minimal but extremely strong. The pulsing and stabbing synths are only made stronger and Marco's screaming or sometimes barely audible at all vocals come in. Very distorted, very icy, very filtered, and very terrifying. Right from the first track after the opener, You Drive, You Try, you are hit with a surprisingly energetic but simple synth over harsh, staticky vocals screaming, You Drive, You Try. Another great track is Leave Me Alone, which showcases a very creepy and soft, breathy vocal performance that slowly grows from whispers to loud groans, with Marco almost pleading, Leave me alone, I'm dangerous, or screaming, I'm disturbed. Sperm on Red Plastic is super buzzy and disturbing. Tracks like High Heels Inside My Throat also showcase a lot of the masochistic and sexual themes that show up a lot in Atrax Morgue. Marco has said in interviews to be very perverted and not only obsessed with death, but also with beauty. Many fans mention him even sending them personal pictures of himself in drag. In the 2001 interview with Esoterra magazine, when asked the question, are you heterosexual or homosexual? Marco in turn replies, I am sexless. I am feeling between male and female. I am beyond sex. I am enchanted by female beauty because it's possessed with a sort of perverse power and attraction. My love for female beauty is so high that sometimes I feel like changing into a woman just to become my own object of desire. It's the other side of my nature. And tracks like High Heels in My Throat are definite reminders of these themes within the project. So yes, Paranoia is great, and at 14 tracks, all minimal and harsh and exciting, you can't go wrong with starting here. Now in a similar sound and vein, the 1997 album, Slush of a Maniac, feels almost like a prototype for the sound that would become albums like Paranoia. It still has that strong, minimal and pulsing synth sound and disturbing vocals at some points, but this album also has many just straight noise and death industrial tracks without any vocals at all, or some of them so harsh and raw they are barely intangible. Many of the earlier Atrax Morgue records had these straight noise tracks, which are excellent and definitely melt your mind, but I feel the tracks of Marco's lyrical work is what really makes this project shine. That's why I think starting with Paranoia gives you a taste of pretty much everything he has, and going to Slush of a Maniac afterward is a great way to dive more into the more noisier albums and see if you enjoy that as well. There are some excellent noise tracks here, like Ultraviolence, that has some of the most raw and harsh vocals on an Atrax Morgue track. Lock the Door feels so creepy and has a deep murderous intent sound in it. It is completely pulsing and stabbing, with very distorted, almost squeaky high-pitched vocals that turn into harsh shrieks. Corrupted is absolutely amazing, and while it doesn't have any vocals, it is pure death industrial bliss with a heavy cutting synth that is very satisfying to listen to. And of course, the classic, Cry Baby Cry, is a classic and fan fave. Creepy reverb vocals, a synth that almost makes you sound like you're trapped in a hospital. So yes, I highly recommend Slush of a Maniac as another good start to your adventure. The next album might seem like a unique suggestion, but it is one of my personal favorites, and I think it has a very unique charm among many of Atrax Morgue's other albums. That would be the 1997 album Closed Exit, first put out on the Italian label Nail, then to be reissued on the legendary Urashima. I love this album because it sounds so much like a horror movie and feeling like you're either being chased down by a killer or in the mind of said killer. The article from Tiswar.com mentions a few times about a few authors that knew Marco about how much he enjoyed exploitation in Italian horror films. Di Tozzoli writes, "Besides the interest linked to noise and industrial music, I shared a passion for Mondo movies and Italian thriller cinema from the 70s with Marco, something that he knew truly well." As well as the main author of the article stating, all his releases dealt with death, corpses, total nihilism, pornography, and paraphilias, often mixed together with his cult for old morbid Italian horror exploitation movies. I bring this up because I truly feel this is Atrax Morgue's Giallo album. A Giallo, of course, being the Italian thriller, mystery, slasher subgenre that is well known from its directors, like Lucio Fulci, Mario Bava, Umberto Lenzi, and of course, Dario Argento. This album contains less tracks than the previous ones mentioned, but all of them are strong on their own, and together they weave the slasher-type story. The track Lullaby definitely has that almost classical style sounding horror synth, with Marco whispering over and over, "It's time to kill." Definitely gives a sense of being chased down through some big spooky mansion by a deranged killer. There are lyrics like, "I want your blood," that sound very vampiric. Who knows, maybe this album is about a killer who's actually a vampire, although leave it to me to want to steer everything into a vampiric direction. There's Not an Exit certainly brings us back to the complete despair and suicidal thoughts of normal Atrax Morgue fare, and the excellent almost rhythmic synth helps carry these desperate thoughts of a closed exit along. Another excellent album to check out, and I really feel it'll be well worth it for your Atrax Morgue experience. The final album, or I should say project, you should definitely check out, and I feel is a must for any Atrax Morgue listener, is in fact one of Marco's side projects, which is Mörder Machine, specifically the 1998 Mörder Machine album, Death Show. Mörder Machine is definitely a bit different than standard Atrax Morgue with its sounds and themes. It definitely sounds more clinical, sterile, rhythmic, and has more drone elements to it. There's a perfect explanation from Marco himself from a 2000 interview with Lockjaw magazine, who was specifically interviewing him as Mörder Machine. When asked, "How would you describe the music of Mörder Machine to someone whom has yet to hear it?" Marco answers, "First, it is music made by a dead brain. It is dead music, cold as a corpse. The music of MM is out of time, space, and life. It is closed into nothing, into an emptiness that repeats itself, without any space and without exit. It is the necrophilic obsession of a body that continues to live, but is dead." In the same interview, when discussing the track Music for Dead Brains, and how this album seems less focused on death and more about mad scientists maybe bringing things back to life, Marco replies with, "It is a nice view. The track has this surrealist atmosphere of suspension, like to be in a laboratory full of corpses waiting to be regenerated. It is a clinic piece." This album is a must not just for the death industrial fan, but any fans of dark, creepy, atmospheric, and minimal drone music. The last track, the previously mentioned Music for Dead Brains, is a perfect example of all of this and a nice track to just eat away at your mind. I say this side project and this album in particular is a must to really hear the entire spectrum that Marco is able to achieve. Well, with all that rambling done, I've said my piece about Atrax Morgue, how I feel about his work, and why I find it to be some of the absolute best and genuine death industrial and noise, regardless of his death or not. I will link all of my sources and interviews below, and I definitely recommend to check them out because it really does help put into perspective the kind of person Marco was and what his mindset was while creating his music and why. How could someone create such disturbing and lonely music so obsessed with death? Well, the reality is, I'm sure many feel this way, and that can be seen with many of the comments on videos of his, like on YouTube and Discogs and other places of discussion about his music. Many reflect and see themselves in the lyrics or feeling that they completely understand him, some even sadly saying that they would like to join him. It does seem like Marco's desire to have his music reach other isolated people has been achieved since many in this world share the same depraved and disturbed mindset. Marco Corbelli was just someone who had the passion and obsession to put that energy and chaos to his own personal music.